If you're a grant consultant and your projects keep expanding while your fee and timeline stay the same, scope creep is not a boundaries problem. It's a process problem. In this video, I want to share with you the system that we built to prevent scope creep before it starts, and to handle scope changes without awkward conversations when they inevitably happen. Scope creep never starts out looking like scope creep. It looks like one extra little request that's really easy for you to do. Except that one little request becomes another request and another request. And you maybe start feeling bad if you want to say no to these things when they're so small and actually easy. But they start building up to the point where you're not making any forward progress on projects because the projects themselves keep expanding. Sometimes this means that you start out drafting a grant, but then it turns out that you have to do a whole program design consultation with the client in order to get to the point where you know what you're writing the grant for. Or maybe when you send out a draft for feedback, you end up with 6 different sets of feedback from 6 different stakeholders and no clear hierarchy on whose changes matter most as you're trying to reconcile all of them. Sometimes it means inputs arrive late, but the deadline doesn't actually move, so you're forced into rush mode without getting more compensation for it. Or sometimes it means that your one planned kickoff call turns into weekly meetings, and suddenly you're getting all kinds of quick questions via email, and you can't actually focus on your deep work that you need to do because you're trying to keep your inbox under control. None of these individually are that big of problems. They're small requests, they're entirely reasonable. But as they add up over time, they start preventing you from doing the work that you actually need to do. That's why scope creep is so sneaky. We realized that when we didn't have a clear container for deliverables and timelines, and when we didn't have clear processes for inputs and changes, the work just kept expanding and expanding, while the timeline and the fee stayed the same. Over time, you start doing more work for the same fee, your effective hourly rate drops, the work becomes stressful even though you're really good at it. All of this is a recipe for burnout, and that's not where you want to end up. Now, I want to be really, really clear about this. Scope creep is not happening because of bad clients. These requests from clients are entirely reasonable. They're not trying to take advantage of us. They're asking for what they need in the moment. They have their own sets of constraints and limitations and stressors and pressure. It's all understandable. The real issue is that without a process, every scope change becomes a real-time negotiation that you have to do. And when you're overloaded, your brain's going to do what brains are going to do and take the path of least resistance. For a lot of us, that path of least resistance looks like saying yes now and dealing with the consequences later. If you go out looking for advice about scope creep, a lot of people will say, just set boundaries. This is what contract clauses are supposed to do, set those boundaries. What we learned the hard way is that just having those contract clauses isn't enough. If the delivery process is fuzzy, you end up doing a lot of boundary setting in the moment while you're already stressed, you're already behind, you're already trying not to disappoint anyone. So instead of just setting boundaries, we realized that we needed to operationalize them. We realized that what we needed was clear language about our deliverables and process that could be used consistently by all members of our team in all interactions with clients, that we needed clear and quantified deliverables so that we were sure when we were done, and we needed a standard process that turned scope changes into something procedural. So we put together a scope of work generator. This is a set of connected Notion databases and templates that helps us scope client work clearly, track delivery, and manage scope changes in writing without turning every request into a difficult conversation. The generator is designed to answer questions that prevent scope creep from starting. Things like, what are we delivering? Specifically, what counts as done? What does the client owe us? And When? How does feedback work? How many rounds are included? How do we need to get the feedback to us so that we can use it effectively? What happens if the timeline changes? And what happens if a client asks for something that's outside our original scope of work? When those answers live in a scope of work, you don't have to negotiate from memory or make best guesses. You actually can point to the agreement and follow the process. So I'm going to walk you through what we have included in our scope of work generator, talk a little bit about how these different tools prevent scope creep and how it can be used during delivery. If you're interested in using something like this in your own work and want to skip building it from scratch, we've packaged the whole thing together as the Grant Consultants Scope of Work Generator in the Notion Marketplace, and there's a link down in the description where you can find that. There are 7 tools inside our Scope of Work Generator, and the first is contract clauses. This is a library of consistent language for the areas where we find scope creep popping up most often. So this is areas like client responsibilities, revision and what triggers a rewrite, meetings and communication boundaries, change orders, and rush timelines. This is the part that prevents vague phrases like support from turning into unlimited expectations. But these clauses are only one part. The next tool is where our scope really started getting concrete, and that's the Deliverables library. This is a menu of our most commonly offered services and deliverables with client-facing descriptions, as well as information about our typical timelines, what inputs we need, and our definition of done for the deliverable. We were very deliberate in how we put this together. Just like we want to quantify whenever possible in our grant proposals, we wanted to give clients clear, quantified deliverables that they could point to. We also got a lot more specific than just, we'll write a draft of a grant. Instead, we spell out what that actually includes step by step for us. For example, researching the opportunity and the funder, drafting responses to the application's questions, formatting the budget in the funder's preferred format after the client provides it, and completing 1 round of revision after we receive feedback. This level of specificity makes the amount of labor and care visible to the client, and it makes the scope visible to us, so we don't accidentally sell ourselves short. So now that we had all these deliverables defined, we needed a really quick way to turn them into actual agreements with the client. This is where our statement of work template comes in. Here is where we assemble the deliveries into one clear agreement with timelines, responsibilities, feedback rules, and communications expectations for this specific project. Inside our statement of work, we actually have buttons for each deliverable. So when we click a button, it inserts that synced block of client-facing language straight into our statement of work. Instead of rewriting new scope language every time or trying to remember what we said last time, we just click the deliverables we need and the standard language drops right in there. Because it's synced, this means that if we go and tweak the language in our deliverables library, that updated language carries through everywhere we use it. So we don't have to worry about staying consistent all across the board without a bunch of extra maintenance work. So after we've put together the statement of work and the client has signed off on it, the planning part of the process is done. But scope creep often sneaks in during delivery. So the next tool helps us keep track of that. This is our deliverables tracker. Here we take the promises from the statement of work and turn them into concrete units of work that we actually manage. We track what the deliverable is. This is the unit that we move through the workflow. We track the client and the project so that we always tie that work back to the right contract. We also note the deliverable type here, and that links directly to the deliverables library so we don't drift away from the original scope language. Each deliverable gets an owner from our internal workspace so we know who's in charge of it. It gets a status so that we can see where it is in its process. It has a due date and a delivered date so that we get a good idea of what our timeline looks like. We have a checkbox for client inputs needed and a date for approval needed by so that any blockers become really visible. There's a link back to the statement of work or contract, so we always have receipts. We have a notes section here so that we can tag early scope drift neutrally. And then we have 2 fields that help keep us honest when the scope starts to shift. One is a needs scope decision flag, which means production is paused until there is a clear yes or no on whether or not a request is included in the original scope. The other is a change order requested flag, which is our reminder to not keep working for free until that change order has been approved by the client. So this deliverables tracker supports the full project lifecycle. It helps us plan, it helps us execute, and it makes it obvious when something is blocked or quietly changing. But we don't want what we've promised to deliver to get mixed up with things that a client requests. So we have a separate database called our scope log, where we can document scope creep as it happens while it's still small and really specific. So anytime a client says, can you also, could you do this, a deadline moves up, feedback turns into a rewrite, anything like that, we log it as a scope request in our scope log. We capture what was requested, the date it was requested, who the request came from, and what type of request it is. This helps us spot patterns over time to see where we might need to tweak our own deliverables language. We tie the request to a related deliverable and client so that every scope event is connected to the exact work it impacts. And this is especially important for us working as a team because the person to log the request might not be the same person who needs to make a decision about it. After that, we track the decision. First of all, is this request included in the original scope of work? If not, is it an add-on? If it is, does it need a quote? Does it require a change order? Is it declined? Is it just something we can't do right now? Is this waiting for someone to make a decision on it? If this scope request is going to change the pricing, we make that explicit. We put down how the fee will be impacted and what type of fee that will be. We also make notes about how the timeline will be impacted and how deliverables might have changed. This is the part of the system that keeps scope change really boring. It turns this is getting really messy into a set of steps and decisions that the whole team can see. So after we decide that a request does constitute a scope change, we need a way to formalize that for both ourselves and the client. And for that, we have our change order template. So when the scope changes, we use the change order to document what is changing, what stays the same about the original statement of work, and what the impact is on the timeline or the fee. It helps us keep our relationship intact because we're not saying no to the client's request, we're saying yes, and here's the process. And honestly, that here's the process part matters for us too. A change order gives us a beat to step back from the request and really think about, is this included? Is this an add-on? Does this affect the timeline? Is this even something that we have the capacity to provide right now? And if it is, what's fair pricing for this extra work? Instead of just doing the easy thing and saying yes in the moment, the change order helps us slow the decision down just enough to make it really intentional. This next tool is especially useful for people like me who often just want to say yes in the moment, and that is a set of extended support services scripts. So this gives us language that is warm but enforceable for the moment when we are asked for an extra thing. It's got scripts for an optional add-on, what to say to late inputs and deadline pressure, how to talk about a revision versus a rewrite, and how to respond to requests for extra meetings and quick questions. These are really important for us because the more tired we are, the more likely we are to agree to things too fast. These scripts give you something to fall back on in the moment. So if you're really great at the work you do, but scope creep is making that work feel a lot harder than it really should, a system like this is probably something that would benefit you, especially if you're juggling multiple clients, if you're dealing with a lot of stakeholders and getting feedback from them, if you're finding yourself on more calls than you were really pricing for, or if you find yourself doing just one more round way too often. If you've been watching this and thinking, I really need something like this, like I said earlier, you can get our grant consultant scope of work generator from the Notion Marketplace, and that's linked in the description. It includes all the databases and templates I just walked you through so you can set up the same kind of repeatable processes for your own consulting practice. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and share this with your other favorite grant consultants.